I want to go back to Job. I always wanted to a long time ago. I can't remember if it was even here, but I always wanted to be able to teach as people were reading through the Bible, and I just thought that would be the coolest thing ever, that you could just kind of make your way through the Bible, whether it be through Genesis to Revelations, and just kind of hitting the highlights, obviously not covering everything, but I thought that would be really interesting and neat to do, and we'll see if it works that way. But last week we taught about Job because y'all were reading about him, and then this week I also want to teach about Job, and we'll see about next week. I just kind of pray as I'm reading that the Lord would lay something on my heart that He would have you to hear, and that would be helpful. So if you open your Bibles to the book of Job. Now, let me just say this real quick. When I think of myself as the teacher of this class, I don't think of myself as like I'm the wise one that has all the answers and let me come impart some knowledge to you. Even like on that blog, I don't always even comment on it because I don't want it to seem like, oh, they've got a question. Let me get in here. Let me just okay. Oh, I see that y'all don't understand that. Because that's not the case at all. It's nothing like that. A lot of the questions you've asked, well, I say, Lord, I don't have a darn clue myself. That's a good thing. Let me look at that. And then some things like, my gosh, the fact that not only did Job lose everything he had, but his wife did. I've been saved for 20 years. That thought's never crossed my mind. So thank you, Ashley Guthrie, that the fact that she had lost everything as well never even registered up here with me. And so I love the conversation. And what I want to do when I teach these lessons is I just want to challenge you to look deeper and dig deeper, and just that we would all become students of the Word together. And since last week when we got here and we studied about Job, all that had been kind of assigned on our daily Bible reading was just up to about chapter number 5, I think. That's all we had read. But since last Sunday, if you're on course with the Bible reading, you've read through almost all the book of Job at this point. And we're in that difficult middle part, right? Isn't that what we said? Some people said, I love the beginning, I love the end, but I will find love for the middle. And I found myself even struggling with that this week as I was reading, that it's sometimes hard to find love for the middle of the book of Job, but I do think there's good things to be seen there. And real quick, let me just point out a couple things, and I want to teach this morning about Elihu. Elihu, who comes in at the very end. He's not labeled as one of the 3 friends, but he comes in, and some people would call him the most overlooked Old Testament prophet that there is Elihu. So I want us to look this morning specifically at what he comes in and what he says. I think there's lessons from Elihu for sure. But I do want to point out just a couple things. I want you to look at Job chapter 8. I wanted to look at how each of his 3 friends came full of accusations. And last week we talked about Eliphaz, and I think Eliphaz had a lot of good things to say at the very beginning there, but then, boy, as his opinion came more and more in, it was hard for me to relate to anything he was saying. In chapter 8, I want you to look at something that he says. In chapter 8, Bildad is speaking here, and he's talking about Job, and he said in verse number 6, if you were pure and upright, then he would awake for you, and he would make your righteousness prosperous. That is an untrue statement. He literally looked at Job and said, if you were upright and if you were pure, then God would come to your defense. And I do not agree with that. That is not a true statement. But then look at some accusations that he made. I want you to make sure you underline these. Did you notice what he did, Bildad, in chapter 8? Did you notice, like in verse 13, look at these accusations that he made. He's talking about how that people will experience difficulty. And then he says in verse number 13, he said, so are the paths of all that forget God. I put a little 1 beside that. I thought, wow, that was one accusation that was dirty. He's implying that Job has forgotten God. And then he says in verse 13, and the hypocrite's hope shall perish. I underlined the word hypocrite, and I put a little 2 by it. I thought, wow, 2 very harsh accusations. And then if you continue reading in verse number 20, he says, God will not cast away perfect men, neither will he help the evildoers. And I underlined the words evildoers, and I thought, man, he's really hitting below the belt here. And then in verse number 22, he said, and the dwelling place of the wicked shall come to naught. I thought, man, to be talking to a friend and use those words, those who forget God, the hypocrites, the evildoers, and the wicked, those were 4 heavy accusations from Bildad. Turn over to Job chapter 11, and then here when Zophar starts speaking, and Zophar doesn't do any better really. Zophar starts speaking in chapter number 11. Look at verse number 3. He said, should your lies make men hold their peace? Well, what had Job lied about? He calls Job a liar right here. So, man, Bildad throws out accusations. Zophar steps up to speak. He throws out accusations. Look at chapter number 22. Boy, it just gets worse and worse and worse. And I look at chapter 22 when Eliphaz starts speaking, and Eliphaz had some real truth to say. Last week we looked at chapters 2 and 3 and 4. Man, he had some real truth to say. But look at what he says when his opinion comes in the mix. Boy, he just played dirty right here in chapter 22. Look at what he says. He says in verse number 5, "Is not your wickedness great? Your iniquities are infinite." Look at what he said. He said, "You've taken a pledge from your brother for naught." He's taken money, he says. He said, "You have stripped the naked of their clothing." He said, "You have not given water to the weary to drink, and you've withheld bread from the hungry." Verse 9, "You've sent widows away empty, and the arms of the fatherless, Callie, have been broken." He said, "Therefore, because of that," I just said that because she broke her arm. She's the only adult that I can think of in the that I know with a broken arm. But anyway, usually a kid's injury, but right? I'm just messing with you. But in verse number 10, he says, "Therefore the snares are round about you, and sudden fear troubles you." My goodness at the accusations. You've kept bread from people who were hungry. You've broken the arms of the fatherless and taken the clothing from naked. I mean, goodness.
That's why I think these were not close friends. I mean,
and I still disagree. I still disagree.
You think they're close friends?
I think they are. Yeah.
do you think they know this stuff?
No.
Yeah,
No. I don't say they think they know that. I think that, and here's that'll just take me to my first point. We always try to explain the why. We always care about the why. And these three friends who've talked for 30-something chapters, do you know what their whole goal was? Is why? Why? Well, it's got to be because of this. Well, then it's got to be, Job. You're not being honest with us, brother. There's got to be a reason. There's got to be a why behind this. And you must not be telling us something. You got to have sin in your life. You've got to have done this against the fatherless, against the widows, against the poor. There's got to be a reason. And here's the thing. Don't we all try to explain the why to people?
But he's not saying these you.
Callie, can you just go somewhere else this morning? Lord, I didn't say they're right. I'm not saying they're right. I'm just saying.
It's hard to
They're specific in what they're saying. That's why.
And it's hard to think that something's in here that's not true.
Y'all have never done this. Maybe I'm the only one. Y'all have never come up with reasons.
Vaguely, not
reading
well,
the
you
Bible.
did this and this and this, knowing that it may not be true.
I think in my head.
They're trying to
Figure out
the why so that he can repent.
Exactly.
And maybe get better.
Move on.
Because
Exactly.
They care about him.
I agree with that. Okay. And here's the deal. Hey, friends, not friends. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Let's not differ on that. I thought it was interesting. Let's just say that. Let's just look at this, just for the sake of looking. Turn to Job chapter 2, and it said in verse number 11. I just noticed this, and I just want y'all to look at it with me. Job chapter number 2, verse number 11. Now when Job's three friends. Now it uses the word friends, okay? Now I want you to turn over to Job chapter 42. Job chapter 42, last chapter of the book, verse number 11. It says, "So the Lord turns his captivity when he prayed for his friends. Then came there unto him all his brethren, all his sisters, and all they that had been of his acquaintance before." The Bible makes the very distinction that I think has to be made between friends and acquaintances. I think Jesus Christ himself made the distinction in the Gospels when he says, "I don't call you servants, I call you friends, and I'm going to tell you what my business is." I think that's the difference, is that friends know each other's business. They know the personal things about each other, and acquaintances do not. I don't know, Callie. I don't know. But the Bible does call them friends, and continues to refer to them as friends, and later uses the other word that I would have used for them. It says his acquaintances. It calls other people. And I guess the question would be this too. Isn't it your friends who come to you in those times? There were hundreds of other people who knew Job that didn't come. I mean,
You're one of them.
well, all right, so be it. Maybe I won't start talking like this next time. But you know what? It is your friends who come. it's not everybody. I'm gonna be honest, and maybe I'm wrong, and I'll think about this later. But it's not everybody who comes to your home and sits with you when somebody's passing away, is it? That's not just everybody. That's not your boss from work who comes up and says, "I'm gonna sit here while your family member's in their last day." But a friend will do that. I mean, right? Isn't it the friends who come? There is a distinction to be made. And here's the deal, even if they don't have the best things to say, they came, right? I mean, they came. I don't always have the best words to say, but I mean, I figure showing up counts for something, doesn't it? It's got to count for something. Callie, I don't know. I'm just going to let that be your decision. Were they friends? Were they not?
What it seems like to me, I haven't read this far. I have, but I don't.
It's not. You hadn't yet. It's Wednesday.
The acquaintances. It seems like they're coming back to him after his hardship's over. And, comforting him and going through with him after it's all over. But those other friends stayed, and then it's like, oh, all these acquaintances started coming back. Oh, now they're coming back. Is that kind of how it was?
Well, it seems to me, and if you continue to read that verse, like look at Job 42, verse 11. I mean, spoiler for those of you who are going to have to read this a little later in the week, but it says, and the Bible uses the word acquaintance before. It said they did eat bread with him in his house. They bemoaned him and comforted him over all the evil that the Lord had brought upon him. Every man gave him a piece of money and every one an earring of gold. But they weren't there in those times when Job was trying. And listen, what I think you got to see about the trial of Job, Job wanted an answer. Job wanted an answer. And the friends wanted to be able to give him an answer. And I don't know, maybe I'm a terrible person, but have you ever not wanted to give somebody an answer so bad that you would almost just make up something to be able to give them an answer? Don't we want so bad? I think about the girl who's got the cancer. We want an answer to that, don't we? Even just as fellow Christians who would try to comfort another Christian mother or friend, we want to be able to give an answer. And that's the thing. Job wanted an answer, and his friends wanted to try to help him get an answer. Now, did they come up with the right answer? No, they didn't. But they were trying to come up with an answer, and I'm not taking a side on whether they were good or whether they were bad, but that's what we have here. And you know what? And let's move on from that. What we see is that his three friends, basically by the end of this, all came up with the same wrong conclusion about Job. They said he must be a hypocrite. He's got to have some kind of secret sin, because that is the only reason why God would treat a man like this. And let me just point this out. The book of Job shows us a very commonly held misconception about the way God deals with His children. Now, if you don't hear anything else I said, I don't know if they were real friends or not. I don't know. I don't know if what they said was worth a hill of beans or not. Maybe they should have just shut up and not said a word. Maybe they should have never come. I don't know. But here's what I do know. The book of Job, I'm going to say it again, shows a commonly held misconception about the way that God deals with His children. And here is the misconception. If God's dealing with you in this way, then there has got to be something you have done to bring this suffering on you. Now, I'll ask you just from looking at the book of Job, is that correct? No. It is not correct. But it is something that even now you hear people say, well, I mean, there's got to be a reason that God's doing this. We can't in our minds fathom that God would put His children through this kind of suffering. Let me tell you something. From what I believe to be true about God the Father, here's what I believe to be true. His Word says the trial of your faith, I agree with Mike Bagwell. It is more about faith than it is about suffering. Because here's what God Himself said in His Word. The trial of your faith is more precious to me than gold. And let me tell you something. God will see to it that if you are His child, He will try your faith. For Him to learn how you'll respond? No. So that you will see how you will respond. And Job learned something from this trial. We know because we read the book. We know how it all started, right? We know that it says Satan came. He came in the presence of the God, and God said, "Where have you come from?" He said, "From walking to and fro in the earth." And God suggested, "Have you considered my servant Job?" We know that God set him up for this. We know God sent him to the gauntlet first. We know how it all happened because we read the book. And we know that God was not He was not displeased with Job. He was proud of Job. It's why He set him up for this test. But then we think, well, God just did all this just as a... Listen, The trying of your faith, it is more precious to God than gold. Let me tell you another promise that we know to be true. All things will work together for your good. And let me tell you, and I don't want to go too far because it's what you'll read later. Job learned something through this trial. Did he do anything to deserve it? No. Was it just all a waste of time then? No. God revealed something to Job. Do you know what Job learned about his response to trials? Is that his response was self-righteousness. You'll see that. Oh boy, it's about to get real as to what Job learned from this trial. He learned that he would not necessarily respond with a perfect heart's attitude towards God. He learned, because God made sure he saw it, that when it all was said and done, Job's response to God was to speak out of self-righteousness, and God corrected it in him. But trials come. They're appointed to us. I mean, you might as well get ready for it and be prepared. Life as your Christian is not about easy street and a bowl of cherry existence. It's not about that. It's about trial after trial after trial, that when God has us up in heaven, He can show us as a trophy that we have truly trusted in Him. We have truly found faith in Him. And that's what you see in the book of Job. Now, the thing is, they all want a reason why. Job wants a reason why. The three friends want to give him a reason why. And I want you to look in Job chapter 27. I want to look at this first, and then we'll look at Elihu. I think this is where you see Job turn around. And you know what? And I'm sure Kelly's already thinking this. Not that I can think for her, but I think I can in this situation. It's probably the friends who drove him to this right here. It could be. Because at the beginning, the Bible specifically says, in all this, Job didn't speak against God. He didn't charge him foolishly. When this all first happened and he lost everything, Job did not speak out against God in any negative way. What did he say? Naked came I into the world, naked I'll leave, blessed be the name of the Lord. He worshiped Him, as somebody pointed out this week. Okay? But as the conversation goes on, Job's looking for a reason why. The friends are looking for a reason why. Look at what happens in Job chapter 27. I think this is where you see a transition in this book, and I don't want you to miss it. In Job chapter 27, Job is continuing to answer these questions that the friends bring. These looking for an answer and a reason why. And look at what he said in verse number 5. Chapter 27, verse number 5. He said, God forbid that I should justify you. Speaking of the friends, he said, till I die, I will not remove my integrity from me. Verse 6, my righteousness I hold fast, and I will not let it go. Ooh, that's a iffy thing to say. That's a mighty bold thing to say when you're talking about why has God brought this on you, and what's the reason for this, and then Job's statement, my righteousness I hold to. And you know what Job had begun to do is, through his own talking and through his own reasoning with his friends, he began to kind of build a case for himself so big that he kind of got to this chapter right here, 27 and 28, and he's like, you know what, I really didn't deserve this. In my righteousness, if anything, I deserve a reward from God, not a trial. And this is something that was mentioned this week. But doesn't God's will always trump ours? Do we need an explanation from God? Is God required to give us an explanation as for why the trials have come? He is absolutely not. But Job, in setting himself up, and I want you to look in chapter number 28 as Job's still talking. He says, or look at 29. There's so much to be said here. I know you're going to read it, but chapter 29. Look at what Job's self-righteousness. And I marked over chapter 27. I put Job becomes self-righteous. And look at what he says in chapter 29. He said, "Oh, that it were as in past months, as in the days when God preserved me." Well, what is he implying by that? God's not preserving him anymore. And he said, when His candle shined upon my head, and when by His light I walked through darkness, as I was in the days of my youth, when the secret of God was upon my tabernacle, when the Almighty was yet with me. What has he implied of God? He's not with him anymore. Now, I like Job. Hashtag Job for president. I mean, all day long. I like Job, I do. But you got to be honest, he made some incorrect accusations against God. He did. I'm not faulting him for those. I'm just being honest and saying that he did. Now, here's what I want you to see. Look at verse number 14. Chapter 29, verse 14. Now, I'm getting to Elihu. He said, I put on righteousness. It clothed me. My judgment was as a robe and a diadem, like a crown. I was eyes to the blind. I was feet to the lame. I was the father to the poor, and the cause which I knew not, I searched it out. He continues. I mean, if we wanted to keep reading, he said, I broke the jaws of the wicked. I plucked out his teeth. Job just continues to think of, I have been so good. You know, I wasn't even going to say this, but have you ever come to the point in your life, if this applies to you, where you've dealt with your own self-righteousness? I was saved, but I was one of the most self-righteous people that was living this side of the grave. Because of all the right things that I had done. You know what I used to struggle with? I used to struggle with this so greatly, and this is just a little side point I'm just throwing out to you, in case any of y'all church people need this. But you know, I used to struggle so much with people who could live so bad and then just come back and ask for forgiveness and everything would be all right. And I used to think, my gosh, I've read my Bible when you were probably out drinking. Man, I've been at this church. I've been in church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday. I have never done the things that you have done. And how is it that man, you can come in here and you can just get all the blessings too? And how is it that one day I will get to heaven because I have, I mean, now listen to me. I said this is before God corrected me. I said I will get to heaven and I will have kept His commandments. Man, I will have lived by that word. I will have read it through and through and through and become a student of it. And I will have paid a tithe on every dime I've brought in. I will have stayed away from sin and evil. And I'll get up there and so will somebody else who's been just as wretched as could be. And God's going to let both of us in. And it's just really going to make me sick. Now y'all are looking at me like I'm crazy. If you are a self-righteous person, you'll relate to every ounce of that. I'd say that most of the people who've been raised in church their whole life, they won't say that, but they relate to that. They do. And you know what I had to come to grips with? Your righteousness that you're trying so hard. It's still just filthy rags. You know what I'm saying? And then there are more things that the Lord revealed to me, but I'm just saying as a side note, God will call you out on your self-righteousness as He showed to Job. He puts Job in his place about his self-righteousness. And I would just throw that in as an aside. If you are a self-righteous person, then be careful because one day there's a fall. You know what I mean? And God will call you on the carpet about it and He'll deal and address with your self-righteousness. I'd rather you just address it now. Because if God has to come in and correct it, man, it's hard. It's really difficult when He starts calling you on the carpet about things. But anyway, so you see Job's self-righteousness. Now here's what I want you to do. I want you to turn to chapter 32. And here's what I wanted to get to. Look at the last verse of 31 where Job once again, he makes a big speech in chapter 31 about how righteous he is. He says, if I've withheld from the poor, if I've seen any perish for not having clothing, if I haven't warmed people with a fleece for my sheep, if I've lifted up my hand against anybody, still in this self-righteous state, he says, then let my shoulder blade, what did he say? Let my arm fall from the shoulder blade. Well, just break my arm right now in front of everybody, God, if I've ever done that. Still in his self-righteousness. But look at verse 40 of chapter 31. He said, the words of Job are ended. He's really answered his own question. But here's my thing to you that you got to consider. If Job has already found himself to be so righteous, but he's still going through this, then what do you think the accusation is against God? Then God must be doing this unjustly. I mean, truly, we've seen that I do not deserve this at all. But God has still brought this evil upon me. And then look at chapter 32. Here we are with Elihu coming on the scene here. It says, so these three men ceased to answer Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. Underline that. Job did. He became righteous. And then at this point, even the three friends said, hey, we can't find an answer. You don't have an answer. There's really nothing more to say. And then here comes Elihu blazing in. Now, I want you to find this. I hope you'll find this interesting. I sure did. Elihu is a young man who comes in, and he's not one of the three original friends. He just kind of comes blazing in. And look at what it says in verse number 2. Then was kindled the wrath of Elihu. He's mad. And then you continue reading in verse 2, it says, his wrath is kindled. But look at what he said, because he justified himself rather than God. Elihu is upset. And let me just ask you this. If you hear people say things about God that you know are not true, does it not anger you? It should. And that's the state that Elihu's in. He says they've sat around here and talked about just how righteous Job is. And by doing so, they've implied that God is not righteous. And look at his words. He's justified himself. He's not sat here and given off all the reasons why God is justified, why He's right to do whatever He chooses to do. But Job has stood here and told of all the ways that he has been right. And Elihu has wrath. And then in verse number 3, it says his wrath is kindled. In verse number 5, it says his wrath is kindled. 4 times the Bible uses the word wrath. This guy's angry. All right, now let's look at Elihu, because I think there's a lot to be learned from Elihu. And believe it or not, I'm not just going to ramble and hit verses here and talk about things that are happening here. I want to bring out a simple yet profound truth from Elihu. Now look at this, and I think this is what Tiffany was referring to last week. Look at verse number 9. So we're in chapter 32, we're going to stay here, verse number 9. Great men are not always wise, neither do the aged understand judgment. Elihu. You know why Elihu did not speak when all the other 3 men were speaking? Because he was younger than they all were. And when he came, he might not have come originally. He might not have been there in that 7-day time where they were sitting and saying nothing. But he did come up and he did hear a lot of this conversation that was going on. But you know what he did? He stayed back and he did not speak out of respect, because he said, these men are older than I am. But I want you to notice something that he said that is true. He said in verse number 9, great men, talking about old men, are not always wise. Neither do the aged understand judgment. Now, I'm one of the youngest people in this Sunday school room. But I'm teaching the class. Blake's one of the youngest guys in our church, isn't he? He stands before us as a pastor. I don't think I have to labor this point to say, it doesn't take age to have wisdom. I'm not saying I've got all the wisdom. I'm just saying in general, it doesn't necessarily have to equal up that when you're old, you're wise, and when you're young, you're stupid. It doesn't have to be that way. It's about how much you've sought God and you've asked Him to make you wise like Him. You know, one of the biggest disappointments I ever found in my life was this, that just because people have been in church for a long time doesn't mean they know more about the Lord than you did. Now, I found that disappointing. I worked with some people, and when I found out, that's a good Christian lady right there, you know. And I was going through a trial at one point. I thought, I wonder what she's got to say about that. And I had a conversation with somebody one time, and I thought, Lord, you old for sure. You old. But I don't think you got any more insight than I do. And I remember feeling so disappointed. You know, you think that you can go to these older people and they're going to they're going to know something about God, and they're just going to be able to speak and impart that godly wisdom, and it is just going to make everything so much better. You know what's sad? Unfortunately, that's not true. That's not true. Just because your grandma, don't take it personal, sorry. Just because somebody has been in church for 60 years, 65 years, it doesn't necessarily mean that they've got more godly wisdom than the younger person. It doesn't mean that at all. And here's what I would take away from that. Let me tell you something. I don't care how long you've been saved. I don't care if you've only been saved a year, if you've only been saved 2 years, if you've only been saved 3 years. If you will begin to ask God, give me wisdom. God, make me have godly wisdom, that I know who you are and I know how you operate. Show me and make me wise. Guess what? He'll do it. It's not, well, when you get to be 60 years old, then you'll know. Then you'll know. When you've walked with me for 50 years, then you'll know something about it. That's not true. God can impart wisdom to the young just like He can to the old. Now let's look at what Elihu said. Let's look at chapter 33. Chapter 33, Elihu's speaking. And here's what he says in verse number 8. He said, surely thou hast spoken in my hearing, and I have heard the voice of your words, saying, I'm clean without transgression. He's talking to Job here. And I'm sorry, this is in the daily Bible reading for today, but you'll get to it. I'm not going to cover it all. He said, I've heard you speak, and you've said, I'm clean without transgression. I'm innocent. There's no iniquity in me. He finds occasion against me, what Job talked about God. He counted me for his enemy. He put my feet in stocks. He marks all my paths. Behold, listen to what he said. Elihu looks Job dead in the eye. He said, in this thou art not just. Elihu comes in, and in his anger, he does go straight to the point. He said, I've heard you say that you're righteous and you haven't had any sin here and there's nothing that would cause this to come against you. But he said, in this, you are not just. Now, I want you to look at what he said. He said, I will answer thee that God is greater than man. Underline that if you hadn't already. God is greater than man. And look at verse number 13. And he said, why do you strive against him? He gives not account of any of his matters. Listen. I'm going to say it's simple, but it is so profound. This truth right here is what separated Elihu from all other of those three friends. You know what he said? God's greater than man, and he does not have to give an account for anything that he does. Let me ask you this. Have you grasped that truth yet? Have you grasped that truth yet? We spend so much time, or should I say we waste so much time wanting to know, demanding of God, why? Why, God? Why? Why are people suffering? I mean, and my gosh, I get so tired of hearing it. That's all the lost people want to know. That's all worldly people want to know. Why did God, if He's so good, let Texas, big old Texas, have that hurricane? Why would a good God let that happen? Why? You know what I say? I don't know. I have no clue. But you know what I still know? I know God's bigger than I am. And I know that He's good. Period. End of discussion. How's the weather? You know? And I'm not going to sit here and listen to me. I'm not going to do, and you shouldn't do, like Job's friends did. Well, let's see if we can figure out an answer. You know, about 75 years ago, Texas passed a law. Oh, I knew when they passed that law about, about alcohol and all that. Oh, Lord, I knew that the Lord was going to come. Oh, golly, quit. You can't come up with a reason. I heard people give reasons for Hurricane Katrina. Well, it's because of the immorality. You know what? We don't have answers. Why does a Christian believe that they've always got to have an answer for everything? Why do teachers believe they've always got to have an answer for everything? Why do you think you always got to be able to explain God? Why don't we learn this truth and say, I don't know. But I know this. God's greater than I am, and He does not have to give an account for the things that He does. Boy, that'll save you a whole lot of sitting and trying to argue with people, because that's what it turns into, isn't it? Well, He lets good people go to hell. I mean, these babies dying from cancer. I don't know, but here's what I do know. God's bigger than man, and He does not have to give an account for His matters. And you see, that was the problem in the book of Job. That's the problem. Job wanted an answer. Guess what, Job? The answer's not for you to know. Guess what? Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar, guess what? There's not an answer for you to come to here. Why didn't you just say, hey, God's God, let's just trust Him. God's God, let's just trust Him. But my thing is, we haven't really mastered this either, have we? Just be honest. Don't we always try to come up with a why? Aren't we always trying to know? We just demand to know. Let me tell you something. It doesn't matter why. It doesn't matter why. We take people in the midst of suffering, and people say some of the most ignorant things. Well, it's just because you don't have enough faith. Well, it's just because you hadn't believed enough. Well, it's just because you're not trying hard enough. Well, it must be because you've done something that we're all not aware of. Well, it must be because, listen, God is greater than man, and He does not give an account for His matters, period. And I know what some of y'all are thinking right now. Bummer, man. We just read through the whole book of Job and we can't even come up with an answer. That's the point, is that there's really no answer. That we can't demand an answer of God. That we don't always know the reasons for why. Now let's look at a couple more verses here. Can I throw this in from chapter number 33, verses 27? Man, I just love this because Elihu said something so true of God's work with man that I couldn't overlook it. Look at Job, and we'll look at a few more things he says, but look at Job chapter 23, verse 27. He's talking about God and he says, look, it's not that He's not answering you. He answers you. He answers you sometimes in difficult times, but look at what he says in verse 27. Elihu is talking about God. He said, He looks upon man, and if any say, I have sinned and perverted that which was right, and it profited me not, He will deliver his soul from going into the pit, and his life shall see the light. Lo, all these things worketh God oftentimes with man, to bring back his soul from the pit, to be enlightened with the light of the living. I couldn't overlook that. Do you know that's so good, that's so true? And let me just say this. You realize how early this is in the whole story, the whole span of history, right? You realize that at this point, all you've had is the book of Genesis. I mean, God spoke to Abraham, and God spoke to Noah, and God spoke to a few other people, and they have this very foggy idea of God. You realize that, right? There's no written word. God's not even dwelling among men in the tabernacle. That hasn't even been done yet. God hasn't spoken to Moses yet. There's no commandment. I mean, Job is just at a loss here for who is this God that I'm even saying that I'm serving. And Elihu spoke something that was so true, and I don't want you to miss it. Look at what he said. He said, He looks upon men, and if anybody says I've sinned and I've done that which was not right, He'll deliver his soul from going to the pit. He speaks such truth about the work that God does with men. You know, I'm so thankful that that is true in my life. Anytime, no matter what I've done. Did you hear that, church people? Church-going Christian people? No matter what I've done, because there's not one sin that's bigger than another one. No matter what I have done. And don't let me get off on a tangent on that one, man. We like to just smooth over some sins, and then there's others. We like to just, ban people like, you better not show up in here with that one. Well, I'll submit to you the unpopular theory that I hold, that your pride is the greatest sin of all. That's so good, I just want to throw that in on this lesson in Job. God said, I'll give grace to the humble, but I will resist the proud. So you come at me with your maxi skirt and your King James Bible. You come at me with your tithe in your hands with all that pride, and I will resist you. And you know what resist means? Just like you resist arrest and you resist an officer of the law and you just get another charge added on to you, you fight back against somebody. God said, I'll fight back against proud people. That hurts when you're a church person, doesn't it? When you read your Bible so much and just do everything so right, but God says, I'll give grace to the humble. Sometimes humble people are homosexuals who are fighting with everything they have to get out of that sin. Sometimes humble people are the people who drugs and prescription pain medication have such a hold on them that they wish to God that wasn't their sin. Sometimes humble people are people who've been caught in an affair and they wish to God that wasn't true of them. Sometimes those are your humble people. You know who your proud people are? Well, it's those people who are just sitting there, their nose so darn deep in that Bible like, oh, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, oh, they're so bad, and I'm so good. Lord, aren't you glad I'm your good kid, right? I'm your good kid, right? I'm just being honest. And I don't know where I got off on that, but, because Elihu said, I know that at this point we don't know a whole lot about this God, but he said, let me tell you something about him. I want to say this again. He looks on men, and if any say I have sinned, no matter what that sin is for, He will deliver his soul from going to the pit, and his soul from going to the pit, and his life shall see the light. He said these things work God oftentimes with man. And you know what he's saying? Look, God's for us. God's for us. Anytime we come to Him in repentance, and He'll reach down and He'll get us. And Elihu just throws that in to say that to God. Now I'm kind of getting off on a tangent because I had to deal with that whole pride thing, But that was me. And when God teaches you a lesson like that, you don't quickly forget it. And sometimes our church people need to hear those lessons. Why is it that we won't let a homosexual join our church? Why is it? Why is it that we'll let everybody else, we'll let the drunkards, Rodney said that the other day, so true, we'll let the drunk people, these people come in, now y'all need to go back where you came from. Really? Really? And you think God just smiles on your prideful, arrogant, self-righteous heart, and you think He just rewards you and keeps putting crowns in your jewels in your crown? That's not what He's doing. He's resisting you, and you don't even know it. And I would submit to you this, an even more unpopular opinion. When I found myself in the middle of a sin that I never thought could be true for me, that's the closest I've ever found myself to God. It's the humblest I've ever been was when I was overtaken by a sin that I never thought could be true for me. You say, sin brought you closer to God? Wait. Now call me crazy. Call me crazy. But when I was so caught up in my religion and my self-righteousness, I thought I was close, but I was really so far away. He was resisting me. Then I found myself a sinner with one of the worst sins, man. One of the worst sins. And I found myself in that shape, and, well, in some weird kind of way, it humbled me. And then I became closer to God than I really had to come to Him in humility and say, God, without you, that's who I am, and that cannot be who I become. And where this is all coming from, I don't know, but I'm just saying, it's these lessons right here. We need to take heed to this. These are the difficult things about God, but I'm telling you, I'm going to read it one more time. Elihu said, God looks on men, and if anybody says I've sinned, then He will deliver his soul from the pit. All these things, he said, works God oftentimes with man. God has done that for me often, so often. You know what'll get you in a mess? And I'll just throw this out there too. It's not sin. It's unconfessed sin. When you let sin twist your head so much that you won't admit that it's wrong, and you want to, instead of just repenting it to a God who says, if you'll confess your sins, I am faithful and just. I'll forgive you from them. I'll cleanse you from all unrighteousness. But when you won't do that, you say, no, God, I'm just not going to, no, I'm not going to say I'm sorry. There's nothing wrong about this. If this is what I choose, then this is what I choose. And you walk in a settled defiance. Repentance is not the absence of a struggle. It's not that you don't struggle with that. I struggle with it every day of my life. It's not that you don't struggle, but repentance is the absence of a settled defiance. I don't just get settled in my defiant heart against God. I continue the struggle. The struggle is present until the day He takes me off of this earth. But I don't sit in a settled defiance against God. I love that Elihu said that. Now look, that's some things that Elihu says. I promise we'll get through this, and this will help you when you're reading it, but we don't have much time. 4 minutes. See why I like to get started? I'm just saying. Verse number 10. Let's look at chapter 34, verse number 10. He said, hearken unto me, you men of understanding. Elihu says, I'm here to speak for God. I think of, what's that guy's name? The Lorax. I'm the Lorax and I speak for the trees. I speak for the trees. That's not right. I shouldn't do that. But Lorax says, I want to speak for God here. You know, he said, you're over here accusing him that he just sits up there and looks for people to punish. I'm the Lorax and I speak for the trees. That's not okay. I should probably ask for forgiveness for that. Elihu wasn't like, his voice didn't sound like that, surely to goodness. But anyway, he said, listen, hearken to me, you men of understanding. He said, far be it from God that He should do wickedness. I don't care how righteous you are, Job. He said, far be it from God that He would do wickedness, and from the Almighty that He should commit iniquity. Verse number 12, he said, surely God will not do wickedness, neither will the Almighty pervert judgment. Verse number 17, he said, will you condemn Him that is most just? Turn over to chapter number 35. Chapter number 35, Elihu said this to Job. Look to the heavens. See and behold the clouds which are higher than you. See what Elihu doesn't do? He doesn't come in and try to explain why. There is no why. There's no why when you're dealing with God. God's greater than men. He does not give an account for His deeds. Elihu doesn't come in here and try to explain why. Look at what he says in chapter 36, verse number 5. Behold, God is mighty. He despised not any. He's mighty in strength and in wisdom. Look at verse number 10. He openeth their ears to discipline and commands that they return from iniquity. Look at verse 26. Behold, God is great. We know Him not, neither can the number of His years be searched out. And look at what he says in verse 27. He makes the drops of water. He pours down rain. Verse 30, He spreads His light over the earth. He covers the bottom of the sea. Chapter 37, look at what Elihu has done here. He is not like the other three. Don't bundle him in a crowd with the other three friends. The other three friends tried to give Job an answer of why. Elihu said, I cannot answer why, but I can tell you this. God is great. God is high. Verse number 5 in chapter 37. Great things doeth He which we cannot comprehend. Now, a lot of people sit here and say, God, what a terrible ending. I sure wanted to know why. That's the whole point, is that there's not a why when you're talking about God. He's got a reason. He knows what He's doing. But you know what you need to do? You need to do what He says in verse number 14. Verse number 14. He said, listen to this, Job. Stand still. There's your verse, Ashley. Paint that on a farmhouse sign and put that in your kitchen. Put that in your book. Stand still and consider the wondrous works of God. I agree with Mike Bagwell. I agree with Tiffany Dodd. I agree with Ashley Gutt. I agree with anybody who said, quit looking at his suffering and just look at the faith, man. He just needs to have faith in God. Now, that's not easy. I'm not saying that. But quit trying to look for a reason. Why does God let this happen to His children? Why this? Why that? It doesn't matter. Consider how great God is. Consider how good He is. And the last thing I want to say is in chapter 37. In chapter 37, he says in verse 23, he said, touching the Almighty. I like Elihu. I like him because he was angry. I can relate to that. I like him because he was angry, but he was honest and he was right. And he didn't try to get off on areas he wasn't experienced in. But look at what he said, verse 23. Touching the Almighty, we cannot find Him out. He's excellent in power and in judgment and in plenty of justice. He will not afflict. He says, I just come in here to speak for God. Let me just tell you this. He ain't just playing games with you, Job. He's got a reason, but here's the deal. He's so great, He doesn't have to give reason for His reasons, for His actions. And you know what? I think it's simple yet profound. You don't need an answer as to why. You hear me? God does not owe you an explanation as to why. Basically, He says this. If you put your faith in Me to deliver your soul from hell, oh yeah, you don't need an answer why. Oh yeah, I remember. If you put your trust in Him to save your soul from eternity, and from hell, and you've staked your whole eternity on Him, trust Him with your life. Trust Him. Don't demand explanations of why, and don't be that friend that rolls up and tries to explain why. Hey, how about you just stick with what you know, like Elihu did? God's great. He does things we can't understand. And he said in there, boy, he said, frost comes from the breath of God. Teach that to your kids in 6th grade. What makes frost, guys? Georgia Milestones. Hey, the breath of God. The breath of God, which I believe that I do. But you know what? And you know what's cool? You know what happens at the end of a... I crack myself up sometimes. And some of y'all don't know him, so you don't even know what I'm doing. I just look like an idiot. But y'all got me, right? Yeah. Yes. You know what happens at Job chapter 38? Job doesn't answer back. You know why? Job doesn't have an answer. Nothing for him to say. Hey, you're right, man. And you know what God does? And I like this. God comes right in behind Job, and you know what he starts doing? He does the very thing that Elihu started. He said, where were you, Job, when I laid the foundations of the earth? He said, do you tell the oceans they can only come so far? Are you the one who put the highest mountain where it is and holds it there? Are you the one who put the constellations in the sky? And you know what all He continues to do? Think about it, Job. Think about it, Job. Think about it, Job. Here's the truth. In trials, all we need to remember is one thing. God's bigger than we are. God's bigger than we are, and He doesn't owe us an explanation as to why. Don't be the friend that tries to give the answer either. All right, let's stop there.